the questions panel that's on the right-hand side of your screen. Today's webinar will be recorded, and you'll receive a copy of the recording within the next 24 hours. So with that, I will hand it over to Laura.
Thanks, Anna. You just caught me drinking my final glug of coffee. Sorry, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon. It's a pleasure to have you all join us. Today, we are joined by Tanya Bowers from AppsCo and Tina Holt from JTRS Solutions. And they'll be bringing you a variety of insights into how to navigate the seemingly daily changes in options for bringing teams back to the office. So this will cover both employees returning from furlough and employees, like many of us, as you can see from our backgrounds, who've just been working from home. After their presentation on both the legal and HR issues, there'll be a chance for you all to ask questions of them. And then once those questions are concluded, I'll just do a brief wrap up on some system questions about the Bullhorn system that we've been asked a lot under these circumstances. And then I'll just wrap up and close. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Tanya and Tina.
Hi everybody. I'm going first. So I'm Tina Holt. I'm from JTHR Solutions, and we are a HR consultancy based in north of England, and we support predominantly recruitment businesses across the UK who are more SME style businesses that don't have internal HR support. So that's me. Do we introduce Tanya now, or are we going to introduce Tanya? Yeah.
So yes, I'm Tanya Bowers. I'm a solicitor and I'm AppsCo's legal counsel, and I also head up public policy, so lobbying government on behalf of AppsCo and its members. For those of you that don't know it, AppsCo is the Association of Professional Staffing Companies. We have around 1,000 members, and we're very happy to have Bullhorn as one of our long-standing affiliate members, and also more recently Tina and her business. And we focus on professional sectors, so primarily STEM, qualified teachers and qualified social workers. Back to you, Tina.
Okay, thank you. So first slide then, please. Okay, so we're going to talk today about these 4 topics. I'm going to cover off the first 3, and then Tanya will take you through the 4th piece. If anyone on here was actually on the launch of the AppsCo HR and Training Hub that we launched a couple of weeks ago, some of these slides will be very familiar to you, so please bear with us till you get to Tanya's point. But I'll start walking you through point 1 to start with, understanding how employees are feeling. So next slide, please, Anna. Okay, so it's really important that we understand how your employees are feeling. And over the last 4 months, I've been working with my clients and speaking to their employees and engaging with them and finding out how they're feeling. And they're kind of coming into a certain number of categories. So you've got your nervous employees who they're worried about going back to work, they're worried about going back onto public transport. And then you've got employees who are really took to the new way of working if they're working from home. So they, you know, at first not keen on it, but actually really love the fact that they're working from home now. So you've got employees that not wanting to go back into the office. And then on the next slide, we've got your furloughed employees who actually, some of them are quite disengaged, and a lot of them possibly disengaged because they've been out of the workplace for such a long time. They're worried about going back to work. They're worried about the confidence, and also you've got those that volunteer to furlough as well, that actually quite like being at home. So you've got a lot of work coming up with engaging with furloughed employees. And then we've got those employees that actually just want to get back into the office. They're missing the friends, they're missing the routine, the structure. So it's quite a very mixed bag of feelings that we've got going on across all sectors with all employees. And on the next slide, we'll talk about what I think is important that you do if you're not doing already, is to conduct a survey to find out how people are feeling, so you can engage how they're feeling before they come back to work. So over the last 4 months, I've been doing quite a lot of these with my clients. So when we were doing the surveys at the beginning of lockdown, people were feeling very differently to how they're feeling now. So it's really important to have these regular surveys conducted. It's just a temperature check to make sure that you know how employees are feeling, especially those that have been furloughed. So how do they feel they've been supported? How are they feeling? The managers supported them, the company. So you get a really good understanding before you're bringing people back into the office of actually how they're feeling and how you're going to manage that. Okay, next slide, please. So whilst we're saying do a survey, and also there is a survey set of questions if you are an APSCO member in the HR and Training Hub that you can utilise. If you're not an APSCO member, I'm quite happy to talk you through how it works. But as well as doing the survey, what we found was really important is actually having those one-to-one conversations with employees. So making sure that you call them as off the back of the survey to just find out a little bit more about how they're feeling, what their concerns are, what their emotions are, and also showing it shows that that you're a really caring employee. And one thing that occurred to me, what happened to me last week was I'd done this with one of my clients. We'd done the survey. It's the 3rd time we'd done it, and then I did the care calls with the employees afterwards. And we found out from the care call that one of the girls had lost a family member to COVID. Now, she'd not told anybody, she'd not told a manager, she'd not told anyone, and that came out of that call that I had with her. So that will now allow us to really manage her back into the workplace when we move back in, and also support her through this period that she's going through. The other thing as well to bear in mind is we're all having to make our offices COVID ready for when we bring people back in, and employees have certain expectations, so we need to manage those expectations as well. So having these one-to-one conversations, you'll be able to have those discussions with people as to what you are able to do and what's not happening. Okay, next slide. Okay, so communicating what you're doing is really important. So employees a lot of employees, whether they've been furloughed or they're working from home, they've not been in the office since March, so they have no idea what your office looks like right now. So their expectation is exactly what it was 4 months ago. So all the work that everybody will be doing to make it COVID ready needs to be communicated to people. And what I'm doing with a number of my clients is presentations to the staff on what we're doing to make sure that we're supporting their health and well-being, what we're doing with regards to the office layout. Has it changed? What does it look like? Do a video or send photos, show them exactly what it looks like. And then the social distancing policy that you're putting in place, what is that? Share that with them. And I've got a number of clients that are actually opening their offices. They'll be COVID ready, so August, September. I've got some clients that are wanting to go back in August. I've got some clients that are saying, well, the office will be ready in September, but if you want to go back, you can, but we're not insisting that you do. So employees are asking me, what is happening? When are we going back? And that will be a huge thing on people's minds at the moment. So it's important that you talk to them and let them know what you're thinking. And if you're not sure, then you're not sure, but at least they know, and then they know when the office is going to be ready for them to go back, and if you need them, if you want them back in the office. And especially those that have been furloughed, when are they coming off furlough? When are you actually going to bring them back into the office? How are you going to do that? How are you going to ease them back into the workplace? Because they are really, really stressed and worried about going back to work. I know a girl, a friend of mine, on week last Friday. She'd been on furlough since March. Week last Friday evening, got a phone call from her manager to say, you're back in the office on Monday. We're opening up on Monday. Now, the stress that has caused her is immense. I know over that weekend, she was absolutely distraught. She's not been anywhere near the office since March. She had no communication about what's changing. And it's really important to keep that engagement, that you do that, because she actually said to me, as soon as things calm down, I'm going. I'm not staying with this company. And none of us want that to happen. So it's really important that that communication does occur. Next slide, please. The other thing to consider as well is the team interaction. So what I've noticed over these 4 months is where teams are actually having team calls, but they're not speaking to each other outside of that. So it's important that the teams engage, and that those that have been on furlough are actually part of those team discussions. Whilst they can't do any work, they still need that interaction with the team. So it's important to bring them back into the fold and make sure that they're on those Zoom calls or team calls, whatever it may be. And if you're doing company updates, and if you're doing COVID-19 updates, make sure that that's every member of staff, whether they're furloughed, working from home, or actually in the office, are all part of that. And the regular check-ins is really important to have. Some managers are really good at this, and they do daily calls or weekly calls with the staff, and some don't because they just think they're getting on with it, but actually they're not. They need that interaction with the manager, and especially those that have been on furlough, they need that constant communication to know that you care and that you're there to support them. And also socials. When we first went into lockdown, a lot of my clients were doing like weekly chats, catch-ups and things, and they just kind of went off the radar once everybody got used to being in lockdown. So what I'm finding works really well now is like a monthly social. So whether that be a team quiz, or whether that be a drinks Friday, or one client this Friday, they've set up a drinks Friday, as whether you have a glass of wine or a cup of tea or coffee, whatever you have, but also make it really personal. So they're going to bring the kids in, they're going to bring the cats and the dogs in, and so everybody just has a really personal conversation, and it's not work related, and that includes all staff, whether they're furloughed or whether they're working from home or office based. Okay, so next slide please. So now it's about getting people back into work. So how are we going to get people back into the office? Like I said, people haven't seen the office for 4 months, so you can't just flick a switch and expect it to go back to normal. So you need to ease people back into the workplace. They need to, they're going to be working with colleagues that they've not worked with for a long time. They're going to be in an environment that they haven't been in for a long time. So it's important that you consider how you're going to bring them back. And one of the things that I'm finding is working quite successfully is rotational working. So we're creating a rotational working program for your teams. And if we can go on to the next slide, this is an example of where I did that. This is the first time I did that with a client. It was a very simple one. They had 20 staff that could accommodate 10 people in the office at once to support with the government guidance and the 2-metre distancing, which I still think is in place, even though it says 1 metre plus. But and what we did was we looked at 2 rotational groups. So you had Group A and Group B, and then week 1, Group A went in for 2 days, and then we're home for 3 days, and Group B were in 3 days and home for 2, and then they alternated that the following week. Now that has been a template I've used for loads of different clients now, and whether they've got 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 staff, it's actually a template that really works. So if we go on to the next slide, it just gives you an example, which again, those who saw this before will see that it's really quite a complicated thing to do, because what you've got to do is decide on teams and departments or floor or whatever you decide is coming back into the office at one time has to be supporting the business. So it has to ensure business continuity and suit the business needs, as well as ensuring employee safety. So it's quite a difficult thing to put together, especially if you've got a lot of staff, but if it's something that I've done quite a lot now, so if anybody wants any support with that, more than happy to help. Next slide please, Anna. And also the other thing to consider is staggering working hours. So people don't want to be getting on public transport at peak times. They just don't want to be on the tube, they don't want to be on the bus, they don't want to be on the train. So be really flexible about when you're thinking about when people come in the office. And also one or two of my clients have also considering not actually doing a full day, just bringing some people in for a morning or a chunk of hours in the day, 10 till 3, whatever suits your business. So try and be really flexible with how you stagger people back into the workplace. As well as staggering lunch periods, because obviously we don't want everybody in the communal areas at the same time, or going out to the shops at peak periods for the lunch if that's what they're proposing to do. So nice long staggered lunches. We've said 11:30 till 2:30 here, but actually quite a few people are staggering it even longer than that. So something for you to consider. And also, whilst all of this seems to be about what the employer has to do, and all of obviously the social distancing policy and all the risk assessments that you have to put in place and all the changes you have to make to the office, the employees also have a responsibility too. And it's really important that in your social distancing policy, you reference that and what their responsibilities and their duty of care to their colleagues, and also how that is also carried into their personal life. So you know, if you've got somebody going to a party with 100 people on a Saturday night, are they going to come in you're going to want them to come in the office first thing on a Monday morning? They need to, you know, have a duty of care around social distancing, around the colleagues, and making sure that they take their responsibility as seriously as you guys are. So that's my quick run through from me. I'm now going to pass you over to Tanya, and I'll see you at the end for the Q&A.
Thanks, Tina. So I'm sort of continuing Tina's theme initially. As we've discussed, we need to be flexible about the time frame for our employees returning. At APSCO, I manage the legal help desk. I do quite a few webinars a week, so I know from the queries we're getting and directors on our weekly webinar that a lot of recruiters are letting employees make the decision as to whether they want to come back to the office actually when the office initially opens. And as Tina said, there's a huge variety of concerns or reasons why they are really keen or not keen at all to come back to the office. But in a way, that does of itself, you know, allow you to social distance and to have the right volume of people in the office without, and you're obviously bringing your employees with you. I think you have to recognise that unfortunately, this is just the start of the journey, I'm afraid, about returning to work. There are going to be local lockdowns, I would imagine, going into winter. You may have to close your office, whether because of an outbreak in your office or because of a local lockdown. Tina talked about rotational working. I think that's really sensible, the concept of bubbles, because it is worth thinking about how you will react if and when somebody has to test and trace, and whether that means anyone else needs to isolate. I wouldn't necessarily say so just for test and trace, or whether somebody tests positive, or until you know whether or not they're positive, then you need to think about, well, who else now needs to isolate? And obviously we will, to a certain extent, be guided by government guidance on this, but it's also worth just having it in your mind as to how you're going to react when this actually happens. So Tina touched upon risk assessments and some of the issues arising out of risk assessments, but the government does expect every business to complete a risk assessment. It is to a certain extent, it's up to you how you do that risk assessment. There's no statutory diktat as to how you do it. We've been suggesting people look at Esquire Patton Boggs risk assessment. They're one of our affiliates who are helping our members with this unlocking the lockdown. 3 of our really largest, Manpower and Randstad, alongside Adecco, have done a very detailed risk assessment programme, which is on our APSCO website. But if you contact Bullhorn, they could let me know and I could let you have a copy of that. There's obviously a simpler version on the Health and Safety Executive. So it's deciding what's right for the size of your business and the complexity of your business. But really it's about identifying the risks, what could cause transmission, identifying who particularly in your organisation could be at risk. We're getting members having queries because their clients, particularly in healthcare, are asking them or their contractors to complete really quite detailed health risk assessments. And on the contractor side, we're slightly pushing that back, saying, yes, we can get them to fill this in, but actually, Mr. Client, it is up to you to control the health and safety environment of your own site. You know, on a production line, if there's a number of different agency workers from different agencies, you can't have them all wearing different PPE. It just doesn't make sense. There has to be some central control from the client. But it's also about your own employees and how you're going to find out for sure whether they are vulnerable, whether they're extremely vulnerable, whether they are shielding, whether you're going to ask that in a questionnaire or whether you're going to do it in a one-to-one. But you do need to understand the risk profile of your staff. Next slide, please. Now, I'm afraid this is a great slide, and hopefully I'm sure they can be made available after, but this is one of Tina's slides. And if you are familiar with risk management and risk assessments generally, then you'll sort of recognise this managing of risks, where you identify a risk and you then look at the likelihood of the risk and the impact of the risk and how severe. That then brings out the severity of the risk overall. Here it's, for example, if you're in a healthcare situation, if there's no PPE, that's really severe. Are people likely to get sick? Yes, they are. Risk is 3, it's the highest. Rating, the severity, risk is high. How can you mitigate it? Well, you get the PPE, don't you? Or you close until you have the PPE. And then that brings the likelihood of the damage down, but if it did happen, it would still be severe, and that's how you come out with the residual risk rating. So if this, some people will feel very comfortable with this, others will think it's quite scientific, it might blow their minds, but you don't have to be this complicated. But actually I do find this type of risk register really helpful. But I'm not going to talk about it more today, but I'm sure it can be made available for you if you contact Tina or contact Bullhorn after the event. So next slide, please. So I think Tina's covered most of these points, actually, really just reiterating how you use the environment, whether you actually need to use meeting rooms, how you're going to use them, how people are going to use the kitchen. And actually it sort of highlights the amount of control the employees are going to have over their own conduct when they're back in the office. You can't actually stop your employees going to stand at somebody else's desk unless you're literally standing at the door with a whistle. So you are going to have to update your policies to reflect the new reality. So that's, I'm afraid, one more HR job for you. So if we move on to the next slide. So what I thought we'd also cover today is we've been having a lot of questions around, are we all going to start working from home more permanently? Is this something that we want to do? Is this going to be the new reality? Well, yeah, I think actually part of returning to work, probably at least for the next 6-9 months and possibly far into the future, is going to entail far more flexible working of mixed office and mixed home-based working. And I think a lot of recruiters in particular have been surprised by how well their staff have worked and adapted to working from home, and actually how productive they can be. And there are challenges, so I don't think it's a solution for all the time, but I think that mixed working can work, and it certainly works if you're trying to reduce the number of people in the office at any one time. So what we're being asked a few times is, do employees have the right to work from home? Well, the simple answer is, well, there's not a simple answer actually, I'm afraid. They have the right to request working from home if they have 26 weeks continuous service. You then have 3 months to review and respond. I would certainly recommend you have a meeting, you discuss it, you consider it seriously before responding, and I would respond in writing. Now, traditionally, there have been a whole heap of reasons why an employer can say it's not suitable for you to work or for an employee to work from home, because it's very broad. I'm going to just read out a few. I am reading them out. Burden of additional costs, detrimental impact on performance, inability to reorganize work among existing staff. So whereas in the past, employers may have been slightly inclined to look for reasons why they couldn't say yes, I'd like to think there'll be a little bit more flexibility about trying to think why they can agree to the flexible working. The employee can only make one application in a 12-month period. It is a permanent change to the contract if accepted, so I would certainly suggest a fixed trial, and you can keep extending those trials, you can keep reviewing. and possibly prioritise certain categories of people, for example, those shielding or that you know with childcare responsibilities. There is the risk of disability discrimination or sex discrimination if you don't handle these sensitively. So it's quite a complicated area and people often do need advice. Can employers insist on home working? Well, not that simply. If you do want to suddenly close the WeWorks office and ship everybody home, then that is a permanent change to terms and conditions, and you do need to have the consent of your staff. And if you're not able to negotiate that position, then you could end up the slightly nuclear option of terminating their employment and offering re-engagement on the new terms. So I think that highlights how that really isn't as simple as you may think. If people are working at home, though, as I've said, it is important to have a home working policy and make sure it's non-contractual. When they are working at home, you do need to complete a risk assessment. You don't have to go to the house, you don't have to look round, you can make it a responsibility of the employee to actually carry out the risk assessment. If you're requiring them to work at home, then you do need to provide a suitable workplace. If they want to work from home and choosing to work from home, then you don't have to go out and buy a desk and an office chair, but nonetheless, it's not acceptable for them to be sitting working on their bed as a permanent arrangement. I mean, we all started working from home in the crisis, and a lot of people were and might be working on their beds at the moment, but that's not a long-term solution. So you do need to bear that cost in mind. Adequate IT, managing your IT security risks, obviously very close to Bullhorn's heart, but it's not just the fact people are using their Wi-Fi like we are here, which can be subject to hacking. It's also the fact they might be printing stuff off, leaving their computer open, putting their business papers in your bin and just putting them out the front, not shredding them. All that sort of stuff is actually something to be aware of. And I put mental health risks, I put it at the bottom. It's obviously very important. Tina covered it, but there is a challenge with working day in, day out at home that needs to be recognised and managed. Next slide, please. So I just thought I'd highlight again some of the data protection issues that people are only again just starting to think about, because we have been in crisis mode and we're slightly moving out of crisis mode. And there are some data protection issues associated with the new working reality. I mentioned at-risk questionnaires. Think about, do you need to complete that type of health questionnaire for all of your staff, or only if they, you ask them if they have issues, if they are vulnerable or extremely vulnerable or have health conditions, and then start to collect some of this personal data. I'm very much a believer in, yes, less is more, rather than unnecessarily collecting vast pools of really sensitive personal data and then not knowing what to do with them. If you do collect them, for example, particularly contractor data, don't just dump them on your CRM where everybody in your business can see them. Make sure they are put somewhere secure with limited access. Only collect what you need. Does it need to be identifiable? A lot of offices are now collecting temperatures on arrival, as schools are. This stuff does not need to be connected to an individual, I wouldn't think. And there may be other things you're doing that actually don't need to be connected to an individual. And then it's not personal data. Only keep it for as long as needed. I mean, this stuff, certain things like long-term health conditions, they're not going to go out of date, but a lot of this stuff is pretty short term. So actually proactively manage the data you're collecting and don't keep it for longer than you need it. And be honest and open with your people. And I've said personnel because it includes everyone, from the work experience person, the trainee, the apprentice, the contractor. It includes everyone. Be open and honest about what you're collecting and why you're collecting it. And last but most certainly not least, update your privacy notice. If you are sending your data to different third parties that perhaps haven't been registered in your privacy notice, if you are collecting different types of data for different purposes, then that needs to be updated in your privacy notice. So obviously that's quite a whistle-stop tour through data protection. Next slide, and this is the last slide before we move into questions. Health and safety executive. So they will be and are conducting spot checks on targeted companies. I don't think recruitment businesses are at the top of the health and safety executives list. However, for example, we are regulated by employment agency standards, and COVID has thrown up a terrible modern slavery problem in Leicester, where people are working for next to nothing in unsafe working conditions. I know these days they target particular sectors of society, or rather sectors. They'll involve the health and safety executive, they'll involve the police, they'll involve the EAS, and they'll involve the Home Office. And they basically swoop in and they look at everything. So you may have certain sectors, particularly of your temporary business, where you are more at risk because of the contractors you're placing. So don't be too complacent, although I don't think the HSE are going to be raiding recruiters' offices that frequently. But we do have guidance and advice, obviously, relating to COVID-19 and a huge array of, we deliver a full legal service of contracts and guidance and support. So obviously, if you are an APSCO member, you can access that, and Tina has recently started helping us on the HR side. So we have seen that there has already been a ruling in France where an employer failed to recognise their obligations in respect of physical distancing, hygiene and cleaning. So we should expect more challenges, not just from the government, but actually more likely from individuals. Now, how far they're going to get is difficult to tell, but I would expect to see more claims actually from individuals over the coming months. So moving into our last slide, that's just a little bit more about Tina's training hub, HR and training hub, that's on our APSCO website. It's not just, we also have a completely separate section devoted to the legal services and to COVID-19, but this shows the type of resource and the way in which we deliver our services to our members, and it covers much more than what we've been talking about today, but also covers recruitment, onboarding, performance management, etc. as well. So that's the end of my presentation, so that I'll hand over to Laura.
So if you would like to submit questions, please do, and I will pass them on to the panelists. I suppose while we're waiting for any questions to come through, I've got a couple, and apologies if these are going to put you on the spot because I didn't prep these in advance. I was genuinely listening to what you were presenting. If you're sat in the audience today and you're hearing all this information and it's raising lots of further questions, what would you say, either between you or each, are the top 3 things that people can be focusing on in the next week to fortnight that will really move them forward in terms of getting their employees back to the office?
Tina, do you want to have a go, or shall I?
You can go first, Tanya, if you want to.
I think the questionnaires, asking their staff, if they haven't already, talk to their staff and understand how their staff feel about returning back to the office, and they definitely need to do that. I've heard that time and time again, that that's been a really powerful tool. And then it's the risk questionnaire for the office. You know, actually, don't be scared. It's probably not as hard as you think in most circumstances. Just thinking about where the risks are in your office. Transport is a big one for London, and I'm not sure we've got the answer for that yet, really. That's really about people's own personal commutes and their feeling of safety. But certainly in the office, you know, working out how social distancing can work. If you have got a fair amount of space, whether you need perspex dividers at all, how people will use shared facilities, the kitchen, but doing it in a systematic way. Keep reporting, recording and saving, because this is going to be what you'll need to refer back to if there are any problems, and it you know, gives you an idea of what your thought process was.
And I think that's right. I think just to add on to what Tanya's saying, the regular updates, even if you don't have the answers, just have those regular updates for the staff so you're still communicating with them. One thing that seems to be coming up this last week or so is there's going to be a spike. What happens if there's a spike? And that's the newest thing that everybody's talking about. So it's managing that. We don't know what's going to happen if there's a spike, but it's managing the questions that your employer is going to have.
Yeah, I was going to ask, actually, have you seen any changes in the last fortnight in terms of the type of questions you've been asked? You've kind of answered that in terms of the spike. I guess I might ask a slightly different question. We don't have any coming through, so feel free, anybody who wants to ask a question. Otherwise, I'll ask this and then we'll move on to wrap up. But what mistakes have you seen, if any, that you can share confidentially that people have made? I mean, you've mentioned the one about somebody being asked to return to the office in 3 days and not being communicated to. Is there anything else that attendees could learn from potentially?
Yeah, I think thinking that everybody's okay when they're not. I think, you know, having those one-to-one conversations brings out all sorts of different things that they're not sharing on a daily basis. And what I'm finding is, you know, seeing senior managers that people think they're okay, and actually when you get to the bottom of it, they're not. So it's making sure that you have those conversations to find out exactly how people are really feeling.
Yeah,
I think, yeah, so in our APSCO webinar this morning, one of the speakers came up with a really good, he said at the start there was a lot of talk about being in the same boat. We've not been in the same boat. I've got a lovely family home, I've got a family, I've got a garden. I'm not in the same boat as somebody who's in a shared house,
Yeah,
and or has a much smaller flat or whatever, and a family and no garden. So we're in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. So just bearing that in mind, and therefore I think actually now recruiters are starting to think about opening their office and giving people the choice. It is allowing those people that are really struggling at home, because they are sitting on their bed and they're in their bedroom for 20 hours a day, you know, 20 hours a day. It's giving them that opportunity to come back to work, but in a safe way.
yeah.
The other thing as well, just to add on to that, is people are using their laptops for work and their laptops for personal. So they're not getting away from the laptop, and they're finding that really difficult.
Yeah, yeah, we've had that quite a lot. Well, we didn't have any questions come through. If you do think of a question afterwards, please feel free to fire it over to marketing@bullhorn.com and I can pass it on to Tina and Tanya. I would like to extend a massive thanks on behalf of Bullhorn to our very learned panelists for giving us a very real overview. That was certainly helpful to me, and we hope that everyone who's attended today has found that insight and debate useful. Obviously, we all move towards whatever the new normal looks like and navigate the seeming daily challenges and changes. As a business, we are incredibly grateful to have made it through the last few months. I think we'd all agree it's been some of the strangest times of our entire career, but we do love talking to our customers on webinars like this. I just wanted to take a chance to talk about a few points that have come up in very recent weeks, specifically related to the Bullhorn system and reactivation of users. Of course, if you have any questions on this at any time, you can reach out to your Bullhorn account manager. But I just wanted to reiterate 3 really burning points while I've got you all as a captive audience. Firstly, you or another administrator can re-enable a user account at any time. And if team members are returning from furlough, they do need to be re-enabled rather than added as new users. If you re-enable the user account, it will become billable if the total number of active users is greater than that outlined in your Bullhorn contract. And obviously you can see why we wanted to raise that on this webinar today. Again, as I've said, reach out with any questions to your Bullhorn account manager. So with that, I just wanted to say thanks again to everyone for making time for the webinar today. We look forward to seeing you all at an event very soon, whether virtual or in person. We'd love that more. Do watch out for the latest topical content on bullhorn.com, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.